The SS United States, the largest ocean liner ever to be constructed entirely in America, and the fastest ocean liner to cross the Atlantic Ocean in either direction. She is the pinnacle of ocean liner engineering, laid down February 8th, 1950, launched June 23rd, 1951, christened that same day, and her maiden voyage was carried out on July 3rd, 1952. She's sometimes called Big U, and a big part of her speed was due to her power supply of 8 Babcock & Wilcox Type M boilers, operating at 925 psi, to supply steam to 4 Westinghouse double reduction geared steam turbines, which drove 4 shafts, 2 of which drove 4-bladed props, and 2 of which drove 5-bladed props. She was the ultimate dream design of naval architect William Francis Gibbs, and she served America well, faithfully, the pride of the nation for many years. But soon, it is likely, her story is going to come to an end. So, let's tell it before she's gone. The history of the SS United States can go all the way back to her designer. William Gibbs dreamed of designing large ships from a very early age. When he was just 8 years old, he watched the launching of the SS St. Louis, and throughout his life, he wanted to design a massive but American ship that would be larger and superior to all others. America! So, naturally, he became a naval architect, and he distinguished himself pretty early in his career. He was first tasked with leading the redesign and reconstruction of the ocean liner Leviathan, originally known as the SS Vaterland. It had been a war prize given to America following the end of World War I, and the ship needed to be overhauled. Gibbs did a phenomenal job. He was really good at what he did. He was passionate about it. The Leviathan turned out so well that even the Pacific Marine Review referred to him as America's foremost naval architect. His newfound acclaim and respect meant that he could move on and actually develop his own ship designs from the ground up, not just remodeling an old one. And the first ship that was built, based off of an original design of Gibbs, was SS Malolo. She was a luxury liner meant for the Pacific Ocean, and Malolo was a good ship. So good that she proved herself pretty early, like almost immediately. During her sea trials, an accident occurred where she was struck amidship by a Norwegian freighter, the SS Jacob Christensen. This impact was really bad. It was considered equal to the same type of impact that sunk the Titanic, and pretty much everyone that looked at the damage figured that Malolo should sink. But she didn't. One of the things that distinguished Gibbs, more than anything else, is that he was careful and methodical with all of his designs, particularly when it came to safety. Malolo had been given very advanced watertight compartments, designed in such a way that even if she took a pretty bad hit, like this was, she could seal off the affected areas pretty much immediately and stay afloat. She was able to sail back into New York Harbor with over 7,000 tons of seawater in her hull. Like a boss, Gibbs was highly praised for the Malolo's design, because most believe that pretty much any other ship sailing during those times, mind you, it was the late 1920s, would have sunk, but Malolo didn't. And this further acclaim put Gibbs into contact with a lot of American officials, and he still hadn't forgotten about his real dream. He wanted to build a really big, just a huge ocean liner, just massive, America. And he pitched his idea, but it wasn't taken up immediately. By 1936, though, the US government was planning to replace the Leviathan, which was getting up there in years by that point. They wanted a brand new vessel, but they wanted one that could operate as a passenger liner during peacetime and also as a troop transport during a war. World War I had shown, and World War II would also show, that a lot of these ocean liners would be requisitioned by the military to move troops around. And the government wanted a ship that would be a good ocean liner, but one that could be transitioned into the role of a troop transport relatively quickly. Gibbs was given the job. This particular design didn't call for the bigness that Gibbs wanted, but he still did his usual fantastic work and created the SS America. Yes! Yes! USA! 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 And the America was a really good ship, but as I said, it really wasn't what he wanted. During the Second World War, however, he was pretty busy developing a lot of ships, like a lot of different ships for the American war effort. He created plans for thousands of different American warship and cargo vessel designs. This included destroyers, LST landing craft, minesweepers, tankers, cruisers, and of course, the Liberty ships. Yeah, those really, really cheap, easy to put together ships that we just threw across the Atlantic to make sure the UK didn't starve. Yeah, Gibbs helped design those. Between 1940 and 1946, 63% of all the merchant ships above 2,000 tons and 74% of all American naval vessels were built to the designs or working plans of Gibbs and Cox, his company. And it put him, of course, at the height of his career. And that meant he felt he should finally capitalize on what he really, genuinely wanted to do. And he was finally given the opportunity in 1945. The U.S. Maritime Commission requested designs for a ship that could once again handle being both an ocean liner as well as easily convertible into a troop transport. Gibbs' design won the contract, and he set about developing and building the SS United States. This ship would be unlike any other ocean liner built before it, mainly down to speed. She was going to be fast, real fast by ship standards. And this was because, since she was built off of a government contract, Gibbs suddenly found himself in a position where he was working with the Navy on building the SS United States. A lot of her features were of military design, not civilian. Though she never technically used any US Navy equipment, most of her inner workings were the civilian variants of military models. And her engine room arrangement, for example, was exceedingly similar, nearly identical, to very large warships like the Forrestal-class aircraft carriers, giving the United States isolated engineering spaces, multiple redundancies, and backups for onboard systems. Something that an ocean liner usually wouldn't have bothered with since they weren't designed with the idea of being shot at, but the United States had these features. This, combined with Gibbs' usual very, very careful design choices, meant the United States became one of the safest ocean liners ever built. She could deal with a lot of things much more easily than basically any other ship. And he never forgot about making her fast, and for a long time her speed was kinda hidden. It was classified by the Navy, and by design her boilers were only operated at 54% of their capacity under normal conditions. The maximum speed she ever got to is actually still disputed. There's multiple different sources that say completely different things. There was an alleged leak of a top speed that she attained during her first speed trial of 43 knots, it's 80 kilometers per hour. But the New York Times reported in 1968 that she could hit 42 knots, 78 kilometers per hour, at a maximum power output of 240,000 horsepower. But other sources place her highest possible attained speed at just 35 knots, 65 kilometers per hour, though it was later revealed that the highest achieved speed she ever got to was 38.32 knots, 70.97 kilometers per hour, which she got to during a full power trial on June 10th, 1952. So, yeah. But either way, regardless of which source you believe, she was fast. Exceedingly fast. During her first voyage, she would set her record and win the Blue Riband, taking it away from the RMS Queen Mary. The United States would retain the Blue Riband until... Let me check my notes here. It's complicated. See, there are faster ships that can beat the United States in the modern day, but no subsequent record breaker has actually been in Atlantic passenger service like the United States was, or any of the previous record holders for that matter. So, technically speaking, the United States still retains that title, but if any modern ship was put in proper Atlantic service, they'd probably take it away from her because they're just newer. But the point is, she was the fastest ship around. Period. End of story. No one could beat her. Not even close. She beat the Queen Mary's record by more than 10 hours, and she wasn't even at max power, because Gibbs told the crew not to do that, only because he was safety-minded. Everyone involved was. While they knew she was fast and could easily take the record, they didn't want the crew pushing the ship because A, they were still inexperienced with her, she was brand new, and B, well, ships have been lost trying to make up time or to beat records over fanfare. They didn't want that to happen to the United States, so they didn't push her to her maximum capabilities. And she still beat the Queen Mary by 10 hours. But of course, this is an ocean liner, and on an ocean liner, things are, well, nice. You're going to be on the ship for several days, and it's true, ocean liners were used for transport, but they still offered a degree of very nice accommodations. The interior design was meant to create a modern, fresh, contemporary look that emphasized simplicity. And a big push, mostly by Gibbs, was to make the ship fireproof. They didn't want anything to be able to catch on fire. The Navy was also fully behind Gibbs in this regard, because they wanted to use her for war, and they didn't want her to be easily, flammable. Plus, there had been multiple disasters with other ocean liners involving fire. This was something they tried very hard to do. It was difficult, actually. Back in those days, a lot of things were pretty flammable. Regular stuff that you could get in the store was like, well, it could catch on fire. I didn't want any of that, so they had to improvise. And by improvise, I mean she is so much asbestos. Just a whole heaping load of asbestos all over the place. That wasn't unusual, but it was a lot. And to be fair, asbestos won't catch on fire. It is very good for that purpose. Also, if it gets in the air, it'll shred your lungs beyond belief. But, fires, hey, it's just something they didn't really think about back then. And it did mean that she was basically fireproof. Wood wasn't allowed on board at all, with the exceptions of the galley's wooden butcher's block, as well as the mahogany grand piano, which was originally going to be aluminum until they demonstrated that the mahogany one was fireproof after they poured gasoline on the wood and set it alight. The wood didn't catch, though. So they were like, okay, you can have the piano. And nothing else! Her funnels were also of a pretty advanced design. Gibbs personally felt that the funnels created a unique and iconic character for the ship. He wanted her silhouette on the horizon to be a very specific profile. Something that was distinctive, so people on the shore could know it was her from quite far away. The teardrop-shaped funnels were painted red, white, and blue because USA! 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 And they weren't just meant to look good. They were designed to prevent soot from coating the deck and passengers. Horizontal fins were located on each side of the funnels. That deflected the exhaust away from the ship. And they were also made of aluminum, though in this case, it was because aluminum was very light. And in other ship designs, it was found that funnels, if they were made of heavier metals or alloys, affected a ship's center of gravity quite badly. It could make them top-heavy. The aluminum was lighter, so it had less of an effect. And the United States was the world's largest aluminum construction project, and the first major application of utilizing aluminum on a ship. Though this had its issues. While in the modern day, aluminum manipulation and reshaping has developed to the point that it's relatively easy for us to do, back in those days, utilizing it on this scale was brand new, and it was very, very, very obnoxious convincing it to mold and handle in a way the designers wanted it to. The funnel's fabrication, as a result, was the most complex part of building the ship. It was a complete nightmare, and the shipyard workers hated it, but they did manage to pull it off. It's also important to stress that the United States is not a cruise ship. It was never built to be a cruise ship. She is an ocean liner. And despite what Twitter wants to say, saying how we shouldn't feel bad about the Titanic because it was a bunch of rich people, and apparently that means they deserve death. Also, by the way, you're a horrible person. Ocean liners are not frequented only by the ultra-rich. That is a wildly ignorant and ridiculous misconception. Ocean liners were used to get around the world before aircraft could be, and they were designed to hold a lot of people, some not really in great conditions, because they were poor. In fact, the majority of the Titanic's deaths were people of the third class, not first class, because first class had first priority for lifeboats. Most people that died on the Titanic were poor. So good work, genius. Modern cruise ships don't really have much of a class system because they're considered vacations in and of themselves. They do sometimes at different ticket prices, you get different packages and stuff, but there's no like third-class deck on a cruise ship. That's not really a thing. The United States is an ocean liner, so she did have multiple different sections for different levels of luxury. First class, cabin class, and tourist class. Tourist class was a more modern take on third class, though it's worth mentioning that even as an ocean liner, the United States' bottom tier class, tourist, was actually a lot nicer than pretty much any other ship's third or tourist class. True, it didn't have the luxury you'd get in first or even in cabin, but passengers really appreciated that even the cheapest tickets on the United States actually offered a pretty nice experience. The SS United States' keel was laid down on February 8th, 1950, in, interestingly, the same spot as the USS United States, CVA-58, which was to be a lead ship of a new design of aircraft carrier. She and the rest of her sisters would be cancelled, but the ocean liner, which shared her name, would be built where she was supposed to be. This was actually a pretty unique circumstance. The United States wound up becoming the first ocean liner to be built in a dry dock, and that allowed her to be put together a lot faster than other ships because her parts could be prefabricated. However, remember, she was supposed to be partially military. It was considered that she would be easily moved into the role of a troop ship, not just an ocean liner. And the Korean War showed the Navy that after they had reduced a lot of their fleet size after the end of World War II, they lacked troop transport capacity, and they wanted the United States ready as quickly as possible for that role. She was requisitioned under Secretary of Defense Lewis Johnson. He felt it'd be cheaper and easier to convert an existing vessel than to build a brand new one for this purpose. But the problem was, well, she wasn't done. She wasn't even launched. Just days after this announcement was made, Lewis Johnson was relieved of his duties and replaced by George Marshall. Marshall didn't think that converting the United States made any sense, because he didn't think the Korean War was going to last long enough for her to even be ready. The decision was reversed just a month after she was requisitioned, and she was given back to civilian workers for completion into an ocean liner. She was christened and launched on June 23, 1951, and made her maiden voyage that lasted from July 3rd to the 7th, 1952. Again, as I said, she broke the Queen Mary's record by more than 10 hours, obtaining the blue riband, and set another record on her way back, which had also been held by the Queen Mary. Her owners were awarded the Hales Trophy, which was a tangible expression of the blue ribbon competition. Her return was heralded with much celebration. Everyone loved the United States. She was a symbol of America, and she was #1, baby. USA! 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 Okay, I'm sorry. I know I've done it like 3 times. I'll stop now. Maybe. Kinda. Sort of. No promises. She was met by crowds of thousands. Helicopters, bands, small boats, all welcomed her back to New York City Harbor. And for a time, she was among the most popular vessels going across the Atlantic Ocean. Their experience on board the SS United States was second to none. Even tourist-class passengers felt that they were experiencing luxury that they wouldn't otherwise get on any other ship. She was beautiful, modern, and fast. She even attracted repeated celebrity passengers like Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland, Duke Ellington, and Walt Disney, who himself would feature her in the 1962 film called Bon Voyage. Despite her size giving her relatively high operational costs, she was ridiculously successful, the most popular liner in the North Atlantic, and had plenty of repeat customers. Her operators were the United States Lines, or USL. The USL had originally been established as a corporation by the government in order to utilize the war prizes from World War I, like the Leviathan, as ocean liners. They still existed and ran the United States, and they were so happy with her that they wanted to give her a sister, a similar ship that could complement her performance. She was to be called the SS President Washington, though sadly, they couldn't convince the US Congress to allocate any funds for the project, unlike with the United States, so the United States would remain an only child. Though she did sail alongside a cousin, the aforementioned SS America. She was older, but she was still a good ship, so she would continue in operation. But things would start to take a pretty steep downslope for the USL relatively quickly. And it wasn't all their fault. If you think I'm about to go into some corporate mismanagement, well, there was some, but it really had nothing to do with that. It had to do with aircraft. It's the late 50s, and aircraft had become a lot more advanced over the course of World War II. Many were being adapted into civilian applications, and they could go further, and more importantly, faster than previous aircraft could. In 1957, for the first time in history, piston-powered aircraft carried more passengers across the Atlantic than ocean liners did. True, ocean liners could hold a lot more people than aircraft could, and still can. But despite the fact that the United States was quite fast for an ocean liner, she was nothing in speed compared to a plane. Planes allowed people to get across the Atlantic Ocean in hours, not days. And regardless of how nice the United States was, many people just wanted to get to where they were going quickly. More advanced and efficient aircraft also meant lower ticket prices on aircraft. People could afford it. It was more economical for the general public. And this only got worse when jets started being introduced, which were even faster. And the USL, like many other ship operators to be honest, actually didn't take the threat seriously at first. They figured these newfangled aircraft were just a fad. Yes, USL. That makes total sense. These newfangled aircraft that allow people to get across an ocean in hours are just a fad. Everyone's gonna be like, no, I actually prefer to take days to get to my destination, not hours. Why would anybody not want to go back to taking longer to do stuff? I mean, obviously everyone's gonna prefer that, right? No, you fools. Not when it comes to travel anyway. When it comes to traveling, well, okay, let me put it this way. When you're traveling, what's the worst part of it? It's the traveling, not the destination. When you're out touring a country or whatever, you like getting places, you like seeing new things. But when you're in the car, or on a bus or wherever, that's usually not the fun part. The fun part is getting to where you're going, because you're there. You get to do whatever you wanted to do. And remember, these are ocean liners, not cruise ships. Ocean liners were meant for travel. They were meant to get people places for business and family reunions and funerals and weddings and all sorts of stuff. People want to get to those places as quickly and reasonably as possible. They're gonna take the planes, guys. And throughout the 60s, USL had other problems, mainly union issues. The Masters, Mates, and Pilots Union went on strike multiple times, and that forced the USL to cancel multiple different voyages and reassign passengers. For a while, a ticket no longer guaranteed a trip aboard, and passengers got fed up with the whole thing, because why would they bother spending money on a ticket when they had to get somewhere, when it was quite likely that their trip would be canceled? Who's gonna do that? Who's gonna do that? No one's gonna do that. They're just gonna go with an airline, which probably wouldn't cancel on them. These are old school airlines, not modern airlines. Modern airlines will cancel on you all the time. But back then, they had standards, people, okay? These cancellations combined with the competition drew away a lot of the faithful customers that kept coming back to sail on the United States. The year of 1960 in particular was so bad that the USL refused to release their yearly passenger count. It was that low. It was embarrassing to them. So they just didn't show it. They were like, no, actually, we're not going to let anyone see this, because it's awful. 1961 dealt another blow to them when they lost their contract with the U.S. Department of Commerce. Prior to that year, they'd been using the United States to carry U.S. military personnel or their families, not necessarily for war purposes, but to get them around. But the government felt that the ocean liners were simply too vulnerable to those dastardly Soviets, so they decided to utilize contracts with air transport services instead. That cost USL a lot of money. But they weren't giving up. They had a plan, a pretty good plan to be brutally honest. They planned to convert the United States from an ocean liner to a cruise ship. A cruise ship and an ocean liner, as terms, are sometimes used by people interchangeably. And that's wrong, because cruise ship is not an ocean liner. They have similarities, a lot of similarities, of course, but the major difference between the two is that an ocean liner, while it often has a lot of luxuries, especially for the upper class passengers, it is designed from the ground up to transport as many people as possible somewhere. It's designed as a transportation medium. A cruise ship differs from this in that it often doesn't even offer serious lower-class options, and is designed to be its own vacation in and of itself. It's a tour. It's designed to allow people to appreciate and enjoy a voyage aboard a massive luxury ship, meaning that things are fancy, and you can often enjoy a week-long vacation even if you do dock in places without ever leaving the ship, because it's that nice. Modern companies still utilize the cruise ship formula now, because it does work. It allows these large passenger vessels to carry forward and still exist in the modern day alongside airlines, because they're no longer focused on actual travel, necessarily. Just making the trip part of traveling actually, fun. And the United States was a perfect candidate for conversion into this sort of thing. She was certainly big enough, and she wasn't that old. They planned on replacing her cabin-class lounge with a swimming pool, and every stateroom would be fitted with its own bathroom, which it didn't have before. Now, the problem with this idea, despite being a good one, was that the USL didn't actually have a lot of money to spend on it. The estimated cost of doing this was $15 million, which not that bad in the grand scheme of things given her size, but they just didn't have it. So instead, they opted for a major advertising campaign that was aimed on reinventing the allure of ocean liners to make people want to use them again, which... Okay, that's a dumb idea. I understand what you're trying to do here, but again, the planes are faster, guys. You can't change that. There's nothing you can do about that. And as long as that is the case, people are gonna use the planes. It's just a fact. And no, it did not work. But they still pressed forward. Despite the fact that in 1961, a voyage was canceled because only 350 people had bought tickets in the first place, they were still able to sort of squeak by for a few more years. For one thing, the US government was still subsidizing the USL because it was felt at the time that transatlantic service must be maintained regardless of profitability. And while subsidizing is good, it meant that the USL was contractually obligated to continue pushing transatlantic service when that wasn't profitable anymore, and even the subsidies weren't cutting it. So they pressured the government to repeal this rule, which the government did, and that allowed the USL to set more unique itineraries. Basically, despite not being remodeled as a cruise ship, sort of act like a cruise ship. The United States started making cruises down to the Caribbean, sailing from New York and docking at Nassau, St. Thomas, Trinidad, Cristobal, and a few other places. As a result, she was the largest ship in the region, and they did, in an attempt to make her a little more cruise shippy, install a temporary pool on her aft deck, and they had no tourist class passengers whatsoever. This did encourage some more ticket sales. It worked for a time, but the problem then was her size. She was still the most expensive liner to operate, and newer ships were becoming more attractive to people that still were even using ocean liners, like the SS France. By 1963, corporate leaders and members of her crew weren't really sure how long she would last in service. And in 1965, another strike happened. That forced the cancellation of every single summer voyage. That lost her 9,000 passengers, and the company lost $3 million over that. By 1968, only the SS United States, the France, and the Queen Elizabeth were still sailing across the Atlantic in the ocean liner format. The United States attempted to distinguish herself from the other two by offering voyages to more distant ports in Europe, Africa, and South America. That made her very popular for those times. People still liked going on her because she took them different places. But that same year, the USL was bought out by Walter Kidd and Company. Walter Kidd & Co. felt that the time of the ocean liner was over, and frankly, they weren't wrong. Plus, US government subsidies had been curtailed because there were insufficient passenger numbers to justify it anymore. They no longer felt that the transatlantic routes via ship were necessary when planes existed. In terms of the financial overview of the SS United States, well, she regularly brought between $16 million and $20 million in annual revenue. During her first years of operation, she made the USL a profit of $3 million. But as the cost of operation increased and passenger numbers decreased, she was operating at a loss. 1968, she lost them $4 million, but it really wasn't her fault. She was just built so late. Had she been built in the 30s, she would have had a couple more decades of fantastic service. But because she existed at the very end of the golden age of ocean liners, well, she just didn't have much time to shine, despite being so loved. On October 25th, 1969, she returned from her 400th voyage, and at first was ordered to start her scheduled yearly overhaul in Newport News, Virginia. This was ordered earlier than usual, and it meant that a planned 21-day cruise was canceled. While she was in Newport News, the USL announced that the United States was being withdrawn from service, effective November 11th, 1969. She was sealed off, and all her furniture, fittings, and uniforms were left in place. Her funnels were left half-painted when the work was stopped, and she still had many loyal customers, as well as a dedicated crew. This decision came as a shock to those people, but to anyone in the know, well, they knew this was coming. They just couldn't justify running her anymore. She was too expensive and wasn't making any money. She sat there for some time, and in June 1970, she was moved across the James River to the Norfolk International Terminal in Norfolk, Virginia. And in 1973, we start a cascade of nonsense. A ridiculous, comical, and depressing. All three of those things, yes, ownership changes, and everyone having a different idea of how to save the SS United States. I've gone on record repeatedly, and I think it's very important I stress this now, but compared to every other vehicle when it comes to preservation, ships are the most difficult. There's no debate about this. Every other type of vehicle, whether it be a car or even a locomotive, can generally be preserved with much more ease than a ship. Because a large ocean liner particularly is, well, larger than every other kind of vehicle. That on its own increases the cost of preservation, but you have to find a place to put it. You can't put a large ship on land. You can't do that. I mean, you can, but it's probably going to cause other problems because these ships are often designed with the idea of being in water. That changes the physics, and permanently dry docking them, as it were, would result in stresses on parts of the ship that would be much higher than if they were floating. So you leave them in the water. Okay, fine. But by leaving them in the water, they are constantly being eaten. Rust, people. It exists. And this degradation is even worse when the water is salt water. Do you see the problem here? Anyone who's ever owned any kind of boat, whether it be a large one or a small one, can tell you that they're money pits. Dock rental fees are extremely high, and maintenance costs are through the roof. Ships are a pain in the butt in this regard, and most just go straight to the scrap heap when they're retired or are sold off for other purposes immediately because of these costs. The United States is different. So many tried to save her, and worked so hard, and spent millions of dollars trying to make this happen. 50 years of ownership changes and repeated plans to save her life has led us to the situation that we are in as of the making of this video. And I'm only telling all of you this now, just so you can better prepare yourself for crippling disappointment. The first new owners of the ship were the United States Maritime Administration, USMA, who obtained ownership from the USL in 1973. The USMA just kind of kept her around, didn't know what to do with her, she just sat. In 1976, the Norwegian Caribbean cruise liner, NCL, was interested in purchasing her to convert her into a Caribbean cruise ship, but the USMA refused to sail that year because at that time, some of the design parameters of the United States, remember she had a lot of US Navy traits, were classified. They couldn't sell her to a foreign power. This forced the NSL to purchase SS France instead, which is hilarious because the Navy opted to declassify the United States' ship design features just the following year. Ugh, okay, no, it's fine. Everything's fine. Let's continue on. Also in 1977, a group that was headed up by one Harry Katz looked to purchase her and dock her in Atlantic City, New Jersey for use as a floating hotel and casino. These plans fell flat, and by 1978, the USMA deemed her worthless to them, rude, and opened up the door for her to be sold. In the early 80s, it was still considered, though, that maybe she did have a use for the government, namely as a Navy ship, because the US Navy found themselves in an odd position of having retired all their hospital ships, and they kind of needed those. They were considered relatively important, and they didn't have any. And they needed to fix that. They felt that the United States was certainly large enough to allow for a proper conversion into a pretty big hospital ship. But in the end, it was decided that that was going to be way too expensive and impractical, so that didn't happen. In 1980, she was sold, though, for $7 million to a group headed up by a Seattle-based developer, Richard H. Hadley. His grand scheme for the United States was to turn her into a floating condominium. Okay, that's happening now. And I don't want to throw too much shade at Hadley because I think perhaps he did have some good intentions here. He was looking to save the ship by giving her a new life. But basically, none of his plans went through, and under Hadley's ownership, the United States deteriorated badly. He did basically nothing to maintain her at all, causing her to be overtaken with rust, and in order to pay off creditors that he had many of by 1984, her fittings and furniture were sold at an auction in Norfolk, Virginia. In 1989, she'd be towed across Hampton Roads to the CSX coal pier in Newport News. Hadley's latest scheme was, okay, we're not gonna do the condo thing. Now, we're gonna try a timeshare-style cruise ship. Excellent. That failed miserably, and his debt got so bad that the United States was seized as a major asset by the United States Marshal Service. She was again put up for auction on April 27, 1992, this time being purchased by Marmara Marine Incorporated for $2.6 million. Marmara did have genuinely good intentions for her, though. They wanted to refurbish her and run her again as an ocean liner, alongside Queen Elizabeth II. And they even began the process of making this happen. For one thing, to meet modern safety standards, they had to get rid of just so much asbestos, which was still in the United States. She was towed across the Atlantic to Sevastopol shipyard in Ukraine, where she underwent asbestos removal between 1993 and 1994. As a part of this process, she was basically gutted. Her interior was almost completely stripped down to her bulkheads, but it had to be done to get rid of all the just horrific asbestos all over the place. She also still had her old-school open lifeboats installed at this time, and those were also removed because of, again, modern safety standards. They were to be replaced with newer lifeboats, but this would never happen. None of her refurbishment plans were pushed forward after this point. She was towed to southern Philadelphia in 1996, and when Marmara went bankrupt, the United States was left without an owner and abandoned. Again. The following year, November 1997, an individual by the name of Edward Cantor purchased the United States for $6 million. And in the background, there were two organizations at work trying desperately, despite all the ridiculous financial nonsense going on around them, to actually preserve and save the United States. They were known as the SS United States Foundation and the SS United States Preservation Society, the latter of which would eventually be known as the SS United States Conservancy, and they are going to come up quite a bit later in the story. These organizations did succeed in having her placed on the National Register of Historic Places. Now, this designation doesn't guarantee that she won't be destroyed eventually, but it did give them a bit more pull to try to keep her, alive. Whatever Edward Cantor wanted to do with her, I still don't really know. It's whatever at this point, because none of that happened. And in 2003, the Norwegian cruise line, NCL, again, yeah, they tried this twice, opted to purchase her at auction from Cantor's estate after he passed away. Their intention was again a novel one. They wanted to restore her for service for NCL America, which is to be an American-flagged Hawaiian passenger service operating for them. The United States was one of the few suitable ships available for this particular service because of what was called the Passenger Service Act, passed all the way back in 1886. That act stipulated that any vessel that is engaged in domestic commerce in America had to also be built and flagged in America and operated by a mostly American crew. The United States had been built in America, so she fit the criteria very easily. She just had to be refurbished. And in a true testament to Gibbs, her original designer, and her overall construction, in 2003, the NCL gave the United States a very extensive technical review, and found her in sound condition? What? You mean that despite all that neglect, all that sitting around, all that wasting away she did, she's fine? Yeah, because she's just that good of a ship. With this good news announced, in August of 2004, they commenced feasibility studies for actually retrofitting her, and in 2006, their owner announced that the United States was going to be retrofitted. 3 years later, to 2009, they changed those plans. For one thing, she was costing them about $800,000 a year for rent and upkeep, and by that point, they had brand new ships that were already doing the job they had envisioned for her. The Pride of America, Pride of Aloha, and Pride of Hawaii, more modern cruise ships, were already doing the work, meaning they didn't need the United States anymore, and they started taking bids for scrap. The SS United States Conservancy really came into the fold in 2009 and freaked out at the notion that the ship was about to be scrapped, and they knew the only way to fix this was by purchasing her themselves. They started raising funds to accomplish this goal, and even got the backing of a Philadelphia media entrepreneur and philanthropist named H.F. Lenfest. Even though he openly admitted he didn't think doing so was necessarily economically feasible. But he had been a captain in the U.S. Navy and was highly sympathetic to the United States, because his own father had been one of the naval architects that helped build her in the first place. He knew she was just going to be a big money pit, but he also didn't want to see her die, and he had the money to help, so he did. On top of that, former US President Bill Clinton endorsed efforts to save her too, as he had sailed on her back in 1968. The Conservancy would, in fact, get a hold of her. They did pull it off in February of 2011 for about $3 million. And they had extra funds to last about 20 months that went into detoxification and worked towards making her financially independent. They floated a whole bunch of ideas, so many different ideas, to try to find a way for the SS United States to make her own money. So even though she was a money pit, you'd still be making money through the ship to go into the pit, and it'd be like an equal exchange kind of thing. Like, they didn't necessarily want to profit off of her, they just wanted to make it so that she would stay afloat of her own merit. So they were looking into the idea of a multi-purpose waterfront complex with hotels and restaurants and a casino. It's going to be great and wonderful. None of that happened. And they also started looking into somewhere else to put her, because the dock she was at wasn't necessarily ideal for any development projects. They looked into New York or Miami, and on February 7th, 2012, preliminary restoration work to prepare her for a proper reconstruction did begin. They raised funds with a new online campaign for this part of the project, and they did get some of the work done, but not all of it, or enough of it. In January of 2014, obsolete pieces of the ship were sold to pay the $80,000 a month maintenance costs on her. And by August of that year, on top of the rent that was $60,000 a month just for her sitting, they estimated it would take about, $1 billion to return the United States to proper service. Which, no, there's no way. No way, unless you get Musk or Bezos or Gates or somebody to back this thing, is that gonna happen? Absolutely not. Granted, in 2016, another estimate did drop the maximum cost to $700 million, which is more reasonable, but still not great. And on September 4th, 2014, another effort was made to have her sail to New York City. All previous attempts had failed. A different developer was interested in repurposing her as a major waterfront destination. But at this point, the Conservancy had just weeks before all their money ran out, and they would have to sell her for scrap. They had no other option. They did get a bunch of last-minute funds raised and pushed things out to 2015, and they even had to explore potential bids to scrap her. But in the meantime, they still exhausted every other option to possibly actually save her. more ideas for hotels and restaurants and even office space. One person decided, hey, what if we install computer servers in the lower decks and link them to software development businesses and office space on the upper decks? That's a great idea. You pulled that right out of left field, didn't you? Also, you're going to convince a bunch of tech companies to put their highly sophisticated and expensive servers on board a rusty old ocean liner that could spring a leak at any waking moment. You're gonna do that. They're gonna be okay with that. No, that didn't happen either. The Conservancy went on record saying that if they didn't get extra funds by October 31st, 2015, they would be forced to sell the ship to, as they put it, a responsible recycler. Just say scrapper. We know what's happening. It's okay. Be honest. But somehow, they did manage to get more money. They raised $100,000 in October, which did spare the United States for a bit longer. November proved to be a great month for donations because they got an additional $600,000. And that gave them the funds necessary to continue with their plan to redevelop her into 2016. This would result, on February 4th, 2016, a company called Crystal Cruises signing a purchase option for the United States. They are an American cruise line. And as part of this purchase option, they paid the ship's docking costs for 9 months while conducting their own feasibility study on returning her to service as a cruise ship, based in New York City, just as she originally was. Well, as an ocean liner. But by August 5th, the plan was abandoned. There were too many technical and commercial challenges, though, to their credit, they did decide to donate $350,000 to help the preservation effort, because they didn't want to see the ship go. They were trying to save her too, in their own way, and did what they could. The Conservancy continued to receive further donations, and made different contingency plans just in case they actually did run out of money, which could easily happen, and these included sinking her as an artificial reef, rather than scrapping her. More on that later. On December 10th, 2018, the Conservancy would announce that an agreement had been reached with the commercial real estate firm RXR Realty to explore options for restoring and redeveloping the United States. Again, how many times have I said that? The Conservancy's rule for this, though, was that any redevelopment had to preserve her profile and exterior design. They could do whatever they wanted internally, but they wanted the ship to still look like herself. And they also asked that 25,000 square feet inside the ship be utilized for an onboard museum. By March of 2020, RXR announced that they had plans to repurchase her as a permanently moored 600,000 square foot hospitality and cultural space, and asked for expressions of interest from major U.S. waterfront cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Miami, Seattle, the list goes on. But this also wouldn't happen. The following year, in 2021, the United States ran into some trouble the Conservancy could not get out of. During the latter half of all this nonsense, she had been sitting at Pier 82 in Philadelphia. That pier is owned by Penn Warehousing, and in 2021, they decided they were going to increase the ship's rent from $850 a day to $1,700 a day. Oh, okay, that's now happening. They doubled it. They also requested $160,000 in back rent and terminated the contract with the Conservancy. Penn Warehousing claimed that the reason they had done this was due to the United States slowly damaging their pier, and the Conservancy's refusal to maintain a previous agreement to cover possible damages. The Conservancy responded to this by stating that the rent hike had violated an agreement that was made in 2011, and they refused to pay the increased cost because, frankly, it was ridiculous. They said that Penn Warehousing was illegally trying to evict the ship so they could then use the pier for more profitable activities, and both groups sued each other. A civil trial took place in federal court this year, 2024. Judge Anita Brody presided and would issue a final judgment on June 14th. Her final ruling was mostly fair. They dismissed Penn Warehousing's financial demands because no, but she also found that because the 2011 berthing agreement was of an indefinite duration, It was therefore allowed to be terminated at will by either party upon reasonable notice, since there was no end date, meaning the end date was up in the air. They could decide to end it whenever they wanted. So Penn Warehousing ending the contract was allowed, but they also couldn't just demand extra money because, again, shut up. Judge Brody then ordered the removal of the SS United States within 90 days. What? Come on, Judge. Listen. Remember when we talked about Richard Jensen and how he was having trouble moving his locomotives when he was suddenly evicted from the rail yard where they were at, and he was only given a very short amount of time to do so, and how unreasonable that is for locomotives? Yeah, those are locomotives. Larger than cars, pretty difficult to move. You gotta get specialized equipment stuff. They're very heavy, things like that. This is an ocean liner! Where are you gonna put her? It's so much limited space, and she couldn't move under her own power. They would have to get tugboats and all sorts of other stuff. This is not an easy thing to do in a reasonable amount of time, let alone 3 months. The Conservancy had no idea how they were gonna make this happen. They didn't even know where to move her, let alone how. They started a new donation drive to try to raise $500,000 to relocate her, but due to all the bureaucracy involved, the necessary surveys, the tugboats, the insurance, and everything else that goes into this relatively monumental task, they just couldn't. Not before the deadline. They couldn't even find a port willing to host her. And now we come to the sad conclusion of this story. On August 30th, 2024, Florida's Okaloosa County announced their own plans to purchase the SS United States. Not to keep her afloat, though. Their intention is to intentionally scuttle her as the world's largest artificial reef off Destin Fort Walton Beach. And this isn't the first time they've done this either. The county had previously sunk the aircraft carrier USS Oriskany, and the intent is not only to create an artificial home for undersea organisms, but also to create a diving spot for tourists. The same day the announcement was made, the Conservancy did say that this agreement was a contingent contract that would proceed only if they had no other options. It's impossible for me to stress that this isn't the Conservancy's fault. Maybe they did make some mistakes, maybe there were some things they could have done better, yes, but these people did care and did everything they possibly could have to try to save the SS United States. And I mean that. And they should be proud of trying as hard as they did. But in the end, they didn't have any other options. There was some more legal hassle because the Conservancy then accused Penn Warehousing of illegally planning to sell the ship because they had actually blocked an initial agreement with Okaloosa County for this whole artificial reef idea. The Conservancy thought that Penn Warehousing was planning to seize her and sell her for profit. This issue went back to court, and it did result in the eviction deadline being temporarily suspended, giving the Conservancy more time. Penn Warehousing claimed that the reason they had added $3 million to the sale of the United States, really? Shut up, was because she had not vacated her berth before the deadline. Though, interestingly, blame was then placed on Okaloosa County because they hadn't responded to the negotiations quickly enough. The ship's sale then fell under the judge's supervision, and in October, it went through. Okaloosa County purchased the SS United States and estimated that the project would take about 18 months and $10 million, because you can't just drop the ship in the ocean. You have to take some steps to not make it, toxic immediately. You want it to be good for the fish and things like that. So it's going to take some time. And Okaloosa did, to their credit, say that they planned on using part of the money to create a land-based museum that would feature several recreated onboard spaces, her radar masts, and at least one of her funnels. As of this recording, she's still in Philadelphia, awaiting towing to Mobile, Alabama, to be prepared for her scuttling. Now, news of this has been controversial among the preservation community, because on one hand, you have the people that don't want to see her sunk at all. They wanted to see her reconverted and turned into a museum or a hotel, anything but sinking her. But you have the people over on the other side pointing out that this has already been violently expensive. So many people have tried to do it, repeatedly failed, consistently, and the Conservancy tried hard, real hard to make it happen, and still failed, despite so much crowd support, despite so many people working hard to preserve this ship that I do believe should be preserved. I agree. On principle, yeah, she should be converted into some kind of museum or hotel or something. She deserves it. But this is still better than scrapping. Now, scrapping means she's just gone. Maybe you get a few artifacts, but that's it. Her material is repurposed, sold off, whatever. She's gone. If she's scuttled as an artificial reef, at least she remains there for quite some time. Some people have said forever, which isn't true. She will be broken down to dust eventually, but she'll probably last a century or two at least. And she will be visited by many diving tourists who want to see her. And she'll create a new home for many undersea organisms. So on one hand, it is better than scrapping, but it also means she'll never sail again, she'll never float again, and visiting her will be a much different experience than it once was. She'll never be able to reclaim the glory of her youth when she was the finest ocean liner around. But again, it is the better of two bad options. Again, on principle, I believe she should be saved, not like this, but properly, but also I completely recognize that it's financially unfeasible. I mean, I don't have the money to do that. Do you? We're talking millions, hundreds of millions of dollars at least to make that happen. So most have accepted that this is likely her fate, and will take it over her simply being utterly destroyed by the scrapper's torch. But some people still aren't giving up. Recently, it's hit the news that a man named John Quadrozzi Jr., who is a major concrete magnate located in Brooklyn, New York, and now the owner of Gowanus Bay Terminal, wants to intervene on behalf of the SS United States. He has other backers for the project, and he is himself quite wealthy, already having a location for her, which definitely helps. He wants to convert her into a quote-unquote floating ecosystem that revolves around sustainability. He wants to build her up with residences, commercial spaces, industrial spaces, all sorts of different things, and says he's got a 1,300-foot parking spot ready near the mouth of the Gowanus Canal. He's backed up by a man named Dan McSweeney, who was the co-founder of the Conservancy for the SS United States. This is a last-ditch, Hail Mary attempt to save this ship. And he's working heavily to convince the Florida officials that, hey, guys, seriously, I can save her. This time, I promise. Please, don't do it. Don't do it. Please. At the moment, she's still in Philadelphia. She hasn't been moved. She was supposed to be, but she hasn't yet. Again, as of recording. And, well, I do like the fact that there is still an option for a good ending here. She still has a chance, however small. Maybe Quadrozzi can do it. Maybe he can. I want to believe. I do. I want to believe that it's possible to properly save her. Also, realistically, she'll probably be scuttled. But to be honest, at the end of the day, neither is the worst ending. Again, the worst ending is her being scrapped, destroyed. Even scuttling will at least keep her around for quite a long time, so people are trying. And, you know, it's impossible not to respect how hard people are trying. She showed up too late to serve for a very long time, but if there was one ship I could say he's definitely loved and cherished, it'd be the SS United States. She's America's baby. And no one wants to see her go. And with that, a special thank you goes out to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's Road Videos, Lord Off 444, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Red Lion, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Josh Johnson, Caleb Brainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Delinsky, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mark Holding, Mr. Terevel, Hayden DeGrow, Bad Train Puns are Best, Kurt Forkum, Harry, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Kevin Wood, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, Duraushi, A Person 723, William Nemo, Dr. Racer 78, Shimasu, Metal for Life Guy, Andrew Bowen, Crimson Rose, Ryan Wehofer, Zintac M, Boss K, Orange Glass, Andy, Ohio Trucker 1, Windy City Rails, John Videola, Extra Special J, Bob Kondirk, Jared Brussel, Levi Anderson, Daryl Williams, DE Ultra, Connor Hahn, AJNH86, Brian Philly, Nathaniel Brown, Robert Baldessari, Liam Wright, Mr. Sleepy, AET Museum, Jonathan Coco, NJ1969, Zendog, Rashad Austin, Westmost, DFL Church, Caleb Crosswhite, Profound Punk, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fun farewell.